It is time. I've never told my story of leaving the LDS Church from beginning to end here, so here we go. Up until my 30s, I was as Mormon as they come. My entire family is Mormon and has been since the pioneers on pretty much every branch of my family history. My dad has been in a stake presidency and my mom in the tabernacle choir. When this story happened, they were serving a mission for the church in Germany. I was baptized to date, received the Aaronic priesthood when I was 12. I was always the president of my quorum as a youth. I earned my Eagle Scout Award. I graduated from seminary. I served an honorable 2-year mission, after which I attended and graduated from BYU. Meanwhile, I was an EFY counselor for 2 full summers, 15 sessions total, and served in the Provo Temple Baptistry during the school year. Towards the end of my time at BYU, I got married in the Salt Lake City Temple with my grandpa as the sealer, and then moved to Arizona for grad school, where I had the privilege of singing in the choir for the Phoenix Temple dedication. I was as in as they come, and I had no doubts about my faith. Post-Mormons refer to the shelf analogy a lot. When something doesn't add up, you put it on the shelf and trust that it'll make sense eventually, whether in this life or the next. I trace the beginning of my faith transition back to my very first significant shelf item, which was LGBT issues. I had fully supported California's Prop 8 in 2008, banning gay marriage, because the church supported it. That's all I needed to know to put my full support behind it. Then I read an essay, a rather long and thorough one, written by a Mormon for Mormons that explained how there is no doctrinal or scriptural support for the church's homophobia. I read it intending to rebut it for a friend who had posted it, but I couldn't. It was too thorough. It completely turned my views of LGBT issues on its head, and I realized we might as a church be completely wrong about this. We have been wrong before, after all. The church basically admits now that excluding people of African descent from the temple and the priesthood was just a result of racist ideologies of the past, and yet it was taught as doctrine for more than a century. But I didn't think of my new perspective as a shelf item, just as something we need to talk about as a church community. Fast forward a couple of years. I was in individual therapy for various reasons. As part of my work in healing, I learned a lot about brains, mindfulness, habits. I began to understand why I did things I didn't want to do, things I always thought were temptations from a devil, but that were actually anxiety, obsessive-compulsive behaviors, trauma responses, etc. I also discovered at the same time that there were some commandments and church standards that I couldn't find evidences for in the scriptures, and that certain temptations lost power over me the moment I stopped believing I was damned for doing them, as if I suddenly had the power to choose when the shame was removed. I realized later on that I had added 2 more shelf items. 1, is there really a devil at all? And 2, is there really a right and wrong, religiously speaking? Healthy versus unhealthy, or helpful versus unhelpful, were starting to make a lot more sense to me than right versus wrong. Meanwhile, I had gotten into self-help and positive psychology books from authors such as Brené Brown, Kristen Neff, and Angela Duckworth. I was surprised at how much I loved learning about how I can improve myself from the inside out by learning from professional researchers about shame, self-compassion, grit, and other topics. I started to wonder why I felt like I was getting closer to God, so to speak, and was feeling more spiritual than ever before, when it had nothing to do with the Book of Mormon, which I always knew was the book that was able to help me get nearer to God by abiding by its precepts than by any other book. It didn't even have anything to do with the church itself. Then, one Sunday, I had been asked to help in the church's library when someone else couldn't be there. And taped to the wall of the library was a scrap of paper that had a printed URL, cesletter.org. That looked like a church website, so I looked it up. Whoa, it was definitely not church approved. It was obviously an anti-Mormon site. At this point, my wife had already left the church. We were a mixed faith marriage. When I got home, I told her about this website, and she said, "Oh yeah, I came across that site scrawled in a bathroom stall at our church in Arizona. I closed it the moment I realized it was anti, and I haven't read it since." To this day, she still hasn't read it. I was familiar with the apologist site Fair Mormon, now Fair Latter-day Saints, so out of curiosity I started going through bits and pieces of the anti-site, along with rebuttals and explanations from Fair Mormon. I didn't think I was in dangerous waters because I had the truth. After all, J. Reuben Clark said, "If we have the truth, it cannot be harmed by investigation," and I believe that. And what I learned was fascinating. It made me realize I didn't really know my religion. I learned a lot about my own church, some of which was very confusing. It didn't break my shelf, but there were definitely some items that added a lot of weight to it. For example, I learned about the three witnesses to the Book of Mormon vouching for other churches, even other scriptures, after they did so for my church and the Book of Mormon. I also learned about other things that the church today had purposefully misled its members about or had intentionally hidden altogether in order to prevent questions and doubt. My shelf items started weighing on my mind more and more. I didn't know who to talk to because there is so much of a stigma in the church against questioning. But I had a friend in my ward who had once mentioned a faith crisis, and he was still active, so I figured he would be safe to talk to. I was getting desperate for some answers, for someone who had gone through similar struggles to tell me it's all good, that I have nothing to worry about. So I asked him about his story, and hearing it practically broke my shelf. He had discovered John Taylor's 1886 revelation on polygamy and had gone through years of intense questioning and researching, even making trips across the country to visit with different Mormon break-off groups. He also had these strange connections with church leaders. His dad is currently ministering companions with one of the apostles, for example. But he was able to secure a one-on-one with then-prophet Thomas S. Monson shortly after he became prophet, and asked him all the big questions that we all wish we could ask. And even the prophet himself couldn't answer them. He gave the same usual answers about having faith. Hearing that especially was devastating. In that moment, I finally gave myself permission to question the very foundations of my testimony, which was Joseph Smith and the Book of Mormon, and potentially to be wrong. So instead of researching things from the perspective of trying to make it true, I started digging deep into things I had previously been afraid of researching and tried to see things more objectively. Within days, everything fell into place and started to actually make sense, but not in the way I wanted it to. I could no longer choose to believe. I couldn't say with my integrity intact that I know the church is true, as I had said my whole life to that point. I had much more evidence to the contrary, and as hard as I tried to find a faithful way to explain the unexplainable, and believe me, I tried, I couldn't find it. My whole world as I knew it came crashing down. I decided to do what I'd always done with big decisions and/or trials: go to the temple. If there was one place I'd receive the revelation or inspiration I needed to save my faith after my scholarly endeavors had failed me, it was the temple. After work one night, instead of going home, I went to the Bountiful Temple for an endowment session. That temple has always been special to me, since it was the first temple I ever went in. I attended the dedication when I was 8, and my wife and I both received our endowments there. I was hoping to have some sort of strong confirmation or experience to heal my broken shelf, to somehow help my world make sense again. I had gone through that ritual probably close to 100 times up to that point, but this time it was weird. It was culty. I didn't want to do those secret handshakes and gestures. I started tearing up near the end as I concluded that it wasn't true, any of it. Going to the temple only helped things make more sense with my new paradigm, the one I tried to prevent with my research. I went through the veil and just sobbed in the celestial room. As this temple visit was my last desperate attempt to make things right again, I decided then and there that I was done. As a final personal ceremony symbolizing my journey and new paradigm, I donated my personal temple clothes that I had used for 13 years to that point to the temple's rental bins on my way out and left with an empty temple bag. Since then, I've continued to learn and grow one day at a time. I no longer feel like I'm grieving that which had influenced practically every life choice for my first 3 decades, and with which I had identified to the core. In fact, I found that I didn't really have much of an identity outside of the church, so I focused for a while on discovering and developing that. Developing my own moral compass was also a big part of my journey out of the church, and that continues to evolve. The world I had known previously is gone forever. A new one has taken its place, but it is much bigger and brighter. I had always been saddened by friends and family who chose to leave the church, so I totally understand that perspective. But now I see no reason for sadness. There is so much good in the world that I never saw before. There is joy and peace to be found that I never knew about. My us versus them mentality has been replaced by a desire for understanding and love among and between peoples of all cultures, religions, and perspectives. And while life still has plenty of challenges, I no longer feel like I'm failing if my life looks different than those around me. I don't believe there is one right way of living, which means there isn't a wrong way either, as long as you're not hurting anyone. So if you love and thrive in Mormonism, I'm happy for you and wouldn't want to take that away from you. I just hope that I and everyone can be extended the same courtesy. Thanks for watching.